Welcome to another episode of the Trailblazers Experience podcast, a podcast where we have candid conversations with women sharing their career journeys. My next guest is Tash Courtenaysmith, and she is a badass trailblazer. She's a multifaceted founder, entrepreneur, investor, speaker, author, podcaster, and her latest project is BizKids, which is an entrepreneurial platform for kids. On TikTok. So leveraging TikTok for what it should be, educational and not just TikTok dances. Welcome, Tash.
Well,
How
thank
are
you
you?
so much for having me. It's great to be here. I feel honored. Thank you so much for having me.
My goodness, I feel like it's all serendipity. We met at D2C Live,
Did.
and since then I've been following you around. It's like the algorithms just keeps on showing me what's going on with Tash in different.
Never know whether to apologize or not because we are very, very good at content production and algorithms. So,
Yes.
But then I do feel sometimes when people enter my world, it's like, I think, oh my God, you're literally not going to get out of it now.
I know it's in, but I always think it's the trade-off. It's either my friend and I have just started playing golf, and for I think a period of a month or so, all we had was golf ads on our feeds, golf exercises, golf equipment, and we didn't even type it in. We just talked about it, and of course, that's what's happened. So if I can get Tash and BizKids, I think happy days.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let's talk about your career because I've listed all these amazing things that you've done, but we all have to start somewhere, isn't it? There's a climb, there's a journey, there's a story behind it. Talk to me about your, I guess, not just your entrepreneurial journey, but even going way back from them. Where are you from? What did you study? And how did you even get into the career that you're in right now?
Yeah, and great. I'm glad we get to go back all the way to them because when you read out, as you did in your intro, the things that I do sometimes think, gosh, it's quite a lot. And I sort of think, how do you get to that? And I think some of it's a function of age. Because I worry sometimes that particularly other women or younger women might look at me and think, oh, I can't do that. And it's not like I think I've achieved anywhere near what I'd like to achieve in life. Because no one's ever happy, are they? Or particularly if you're my type of personality, you're never happy. But I would hate for people to compare themselves to me, particularly younger people, because of the fact I think, well, I'm 47 years old. Okay, I am old. I am like 47
You don't
years
look
old.
it, girl. You don't look
Thank
it.
you. And it's a function of time. There's a lot of time that's gone by there. There's a lot.
Yeah.
So, I was like everyone else. I went to uni. I studied psychology. I think I originally...
Psychology.
Yeah, psychology and biology. So I'm come from a science background. Originally wanted to join the police force and was very focused on joining the police force. I did all sorts of things at school, like go to Hendon, the police training centre for various experiences. And I was obsessed about joining the police force. But then what actually happened was during uni, I became an aerobics instructor, really because it seemed like, I was working in a bar and you could earn like, I don't know, £6 or £7 an hour in a bar, but you could earn £25 an hour as an aerobics instructor. And I was into aerobics. I thought, brilliant, I'll do that. And that then led me into working on health magazines and on national newspapers as a health journalist, and then subsequently a mainstream reporter. So which was great. We all, I don't know if you remember back then, but magazines were the thing, right? Everybody loved magazines. In the same way as social media is the thing now, monthly and weekly magazines were huge. I remember as a teenager running to the shops on Wednesdays to get Just 17 and it being a really big deal. So I started working on glossy magazines and then from there went through various roles, working my way up the ranks of a magazine until I joined the Daily Mail, first as a health editor and then as a general feature writer on the Daily Mail, and therefore moved into more mainstream reporting, not just reporting around health and beauty, which is where I'd started my career.
And did you, at that point, so obviously you finish your studies and you get into the world of media, what was your first impression?
It was amazing. It was quite hard to get into the world of media. Things have changed. Back then you really had to do work experience. So to some extent, what people talked about in terms of elitism in the media because of, essentially you needed parents who would cover you to do this work experience period was true. I think I did to 5 months of work experience, taking it incredibly seriously because I just loved magazines. I was absolutely thrilled to have a role on a magazine. And, seeing how I've worked on monthly magazines and weekly magazines and seeing how they're all put together and all the things we used to do and all the things we used to see and like the places we used to go. I mean, as soon as I got into that world, I just loved it. So I wanted to do work experience for as long as possible until I got a job. And, it was brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And to your point about, it's interesting, I was listening to an interview with Rory Sutherland, who I just think I could listen to him all day in terms of, he has a very good way of distilling marketing science through storytelling and giving clear examples. And he was talking about how the problem now is, it is a big problem, is the students are being encouraged to study and then they haven't acquired any work experience at all and they're struggling in work environments. So you have this dilemma where they would just rather than work 100% remote, but if you're working 100% remote, you can't actually learn, you don't get the lessons of the nuances of dealing with people. And actually those who started off with work experience have actually come further in their career, but they've got all these different buckets that they can pull into that's helping their career in a way.
Certainly, I know that, work experience on glossy magazines was incredibly competitive because everybody wanted to do it. And it was paramount to be in the office. I used to get the train to London every day. And the way I progressed from being and some people would do work experience for a year or longer, it was really difficult to get an actual job. The way I progressed was by just listening to everybody and looking out for anybody who wanted anything done. And as soon as I heard someone wants a cup of tea, someone needs to send back clothes in the fashion cupboard, I was like, I'll do that. Yeah. And when I did get a job on a magazine, obviously I was thrilled, but they said, they had noted that I had been taking so much initiative during that work experience period. And you can't do that if you're working remotely because you don't have the contact. These were things that I heard across the office, like someone on the other side of the room would be saying, oh, I've got to do this. So context was really important for me in terms of getting a job in a very competitive arena, which was monthly magazines at the time.
Yeah. So you then worked at the Daily Mail and then moved to Talk to the Press, which is basically the business you founded. Yeah.
And I founded that when I was 27.
How did you even do that then, girl?
Well, I mean, there's this very famous story, the book called The E-Myth, which is all about how entrepreneurs tend to create businesses out of things that they know. So if you're a baker, you'll start your own bakery.
Yes.
So I was a journalist at the Daily Mail, and I could see that as a newspaper, we were buying lots of stories from a number of sources, and those would be freelance journalists and regional media press agencies, they're called. And we'd be originating stories ourselves. So I was a writer, so I was very much in the space of the daily news stories. So like all people who, you understand once you've read the E-Myth, I was a journalist. So I decided to set up a journalism business. I just sort of thought, I wanted to be a great journalist. And I could see that there were so many people. You've got to remember, it was a different time. These publications had so much power. And I sort of thought, well, to be one of the top here at the Daily Mail, I will have to be here for 20 years. It's going to be, that's the type of work career it was. So I thought I'll set up my own press agency. The reason I came up with a press agency is because those were the businesses that were selling content into us. And I thought, well, if I can get some provide stories, I was very used to dealing with members of the public. The types of stories I specialized in were what we used to describe as long emotional. They would typically involve families who'd come into the news because of a terrible tragedy. And I used to be sent to these houses, and they typically be caught up in some massive thing in the news, but the only reason you're caught up in something in the news is because something's gone terribly wrong, usually. So I thought, well, look, I know I'm very good at dealing with families and ordinary people in the news. So if I can set up a press agency and source this type of content, then I'll be able to place it and have a small business. And that's really how it started. What I did differently, and that led to everything else in my career, is at the time, most press agencies were operating based on regions. So if you lived in Bedfordshire, you'd set up a press agency in Bedfordshire. I had built a website to showcase my portfolio as a freelance journalist, and everybody had thought, this was 2007. Everybody thought my simple portfolio website was the absolute bee's knees. They were like, how have you done this? This is amazing. Oh my goodness, you've got an email that's got your name, like Natasha at natashacourtenaysmith. It was seen as very pioneering, which I'm not sure. Revolutionary. Yeah. I mean, obviously it doesn't seem that way at all today. So I thought, what if I set up another website so that people who have stories can find me? Because by this point I'd learned a bit about websites and I'd learned about SEO, and I thought, at least, at the very least, it will mean maybe I'll get the occasional person who wants to share their story with the media contacting me. So I set up a website and I spent about 9 months going through a book called Get into Bed with Google, 55 things you need to do to rank your website top of Google or something like that. I did all 55. It was incredibly difficult because a lot of it was very technical and I really didn't have the technical experience. But anyway, I managed to get through probably all 55 of them. And my website started ranking top of Google. At the same time, there was a rise in general Googling amongst members of the public. So when press arrived on their doorstep, instead of, just accepting what the journalists would say, they would turn to their computer and go to Google. This again was 2008.
Yeah.
There was, a definite, and that my website was seen as very pioneering in its time because I was suddenly sourcing stories from the internet. I wasn't operating based on a geographical boundary. Some of the other geographical press agencies were very cross because they were like, hang on, we look after Bedfordshire. Was this internet agency suddenly able to take stories from Bedfordshire? But all of that was just made up rules. No press agency has a boundary. Nobody can own a county. It was kind of ridiculous, really. So suddenly found myself in a position where I had a website and it was delivering story after story after story after story, day after day after day. So I was able to employ a team, starting with interns, and I trained them all to help manage these stories and place them. And from there, I was able to grow out it's called story brokering, which is securing people deals, for the stories they're trying to place. We also secured, to ensure they earn as much as possible, the stories covered in the right way. We would be placing their stories into mainstream news, national newspapers, into book deals, onto television, into monthly magazines, into weekly magazines. So really, I built a fantastic lead generation machine with that website, Talk to the Press, and it still generates stories today. I mean, I sold it in 2014 to SWNS Media Group, and that was my first exit. It still generates stories to this day. It still ranks top of Google. I mean, everybody tried to set up in competition with me from the Sun and the Mirror, but Talk to the Press has always held steady. And I believe it's because in 2007, I did this book called 55 Things to Do, to rank top of Google. And I think they gave it an extremely good foundation.
So basically the fundamentals, I was talking to someone the other day about consistency is when you're building a business or a product or a service, there are those first few years of building the consistency, build before it then accelerates into, and that's what you did, isn't it, at the beginning? And also, do you think it's also right time, right place, right moment type of thing?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's always two ways to tell that story, and I'm aware of both. One, I could say, well, I was incredibly foresightful and digitally disruptive. The other is, look, I wasn't that good at finding stories by myself. I set up a website. I followed the instructions in this book, and I was in there at the right place at the right time because I was the first person to launch an online press agency and to do such rigorous SEO work at the same time, which really protected me and protected that website for, we're nearly 15 years on, and that work has still left that website in an incredibly good position.
And that's something to be proud of, isn't it? Because normally when you exit or sell a business, all you're hearing is it deteriorating and not being the same, etc. And it's still there, it's still thriving. At what point, Tash, because I ask this question a lot, is you start a business, it's just you. At what point do you actually know that you have a business and you have to now hire people, staff, have proper contracts, etc.? When was that realization? For some people, when it's a product or a service, it's when they have all those deliveries that they have to pack and it's filling up their mum's bedroom or living room. What was it for you?
Well, for me, with Talk to the Press, it was the fact that I then was pregnant with my son. So I launched my website and, I was a journalist, so I knew how to get publicity. So I got myself onto BBC Breakfast, which resulted in, I don't know how many hundreds of stories coming through the website. pretty much at the same time I found out I was pregnant with my son, who's now 16. So I thought and I was terrified, right? I thought, my God, when I have a baby, I'm not going to be able to think straight. I'm going to be a different person. What's going to happen? So I thought, right, I need to get this business into a place because I'm going to become a different person, which actually didn't happen to me at all. But I think that's the way I felt at that time. So that's why I employed my first person, because as an assistant, it's just assistant to Tash. Like, it wasn't a particularly glamorous role. Like, God knows if I even got the employment contracts right, to be honest, Natalia. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that this website was delivering stories and I was going to have a baby. And I didn't know what I was going to be like on the other side of having a baby. And I was very proud of what I created and I wanted to protect it.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? When you are pregnant or there's being pregnant, it's a big thing happening in your life, isn't it? You're bringing life into the world.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. Yeah. And everyone copes different. Everyone has a different reaction. You just don't know.
Exactly. And some people say, oh, I've got more energy now. I'm more creative. I can go 100 miles an hour. Then you hear the stories saying, oh, I couldn't remember anything. And I used to be in meetings and I'd have brain fog. You're like, oh my days, what's going on?
And I think I was very, I think if you read national news, because it's quite negative. So I was very critical, would always be.
Yeah.
I really was quite fearful of being pregnant when I became pregnant.
But when we live in an amazing time, isn't it, where we can change the narrative? I mean, you've had children, you've run multiple businesses. I've raised two amazing children and I'm, doing what I'm doing now. So you can do it all. It is possible.
Yes, it is. Although it doesn't always feel like that every day. That's for sure.
No. I realized, Tash, with being a parent is I could set goals, but I had to realize that they could all not happen at the same time. And I would have to sacrifice. You always have to sacrifice something to get to the next level. And it's being comfortable with that at that moment in time.
And I think, this is with the constant debate at the Daily Mail at the time I was there was, the concept of having it all. And in particular, can she have it all? This was a mass media topic, in the early 2000s. There was even various books written called Having It All. And that concept was massive. I think for us women at the time, we're in our 20s. It was a big thing. I remember discussing it with my friends. Can she have it all? Should we want to have it all? Is it okay to have, going round the houses on it? I don't think I know the answers to that 20 years on. So I think at times you feel like, well, you're managing to have quite a lot of it. And at other times you're like, oh God, I think I'm messing the whole thing up.
I think that's it. And everyone's story is different. It's your perspective or your view of what you did and how it worked might not work for someone else.
I know. And it really takes, I think, you to get older and past the stage of having young children to even understand that. I think when you have young children, it's a very stressful time. You'll really look, particularly your first. I don't know if you were like this, but I certainly looked around other mothers and compared myself constantly. I was always worrying, oh my God, everyone's got it right apart from me. Why am I so ambitious? What's wrong with me? Why can't I just relax? And, I tore myself in knots for probably about the first 10 years, to be honest, in terms of that balance. And now it just doesn't seem to matter so much anymore. I guess it's because the kids are a bit older and everyone's a bit more chill and everyone realizes, there isn't such a thing as perfection, and certainly not on an ongoing indefinite basis.
Yeah, definitely. I think you just become more chill. My boys are 19 and 17 and I'm just like, I'm so happy that I did it then, because I've got friends who are now going through the whole IVF and I was like, I don't think I could do it at this age. No.
Yeah.
So launching that business has led to, you've launched and exited multiple businesses, and we could literally spend 3 or 4 hours talking about that, from digital businesses, D2C live, etc. And I really want to talk about BizKids because that's your latest venture. Let's hone in, fast forward. How did you come up with that particular concept?
Well, BizKids started with another business I had called the nottinghillshoppingbag, which is a souvenir tote bag sold in Portobello Road. I launched that 15 years ago and it was related to Talk to the Press. Our offices were in Portobello Road and I'd always wanted to be, in Notting Hill. I'm a cliche. I'd watched the movie. I loved it. I lived in West London. I liked the carnival. Anyway, so I got these offices in Portobello Road. I thought, my God, I'm so cool. Anyway, being in Portobello Road, I then realised all these people who visit Portobello Road weren't getting what they wanted, which is they were there for the same reason I was there, because it was a very special place. So I launched this tote bag called the Notting Hill Shopping Bag. I launched that during the time I had Talk to the Press, around about 2009. And I started wholesaling this bag up and down Portobello Road. Now, that business, I learned a huge amount from, because it was a very simple product-based business. I also learned how woefully ill-equipped I was to deal with change and newness. So I had to go around on foot, talking to people. Now, in Portobello Road, you've got an extremely diverse set of people running market stalls and running shops. Many of them have to stand outside in the freezing cold all day long, and have been doing that for decades, if not generations. So I had to go around, saying, would people like to stock my bag? The fuss I made about this was a disgrace. Like, I talked myself out of it for 3 days solid. I was so scared. And then once I got into Portobello, bearing in mind my office was there anyway, and I started going around, obviously some people said yes and some people said no.
Well, they're also very hard negotiators, the people,
they
the
are.
traders
I
on
mean,
Portobello Road.
traders, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And there were people from all over the world, but there were also children working in Portobello Road. It's the children of various stallholders. There was a little boy called Chase who was 12, and I was making a massive fuss about going out and talking to these market traders and shop owners. And Chase was standing on a stall. Remember, he was selling beauty products, counting money and talking to customers, looking them in the eye, talking to them about the qualities of this product. And I thought, my goodness, whatever I needed to learn, I have not learned. Like, as a 12-year-old boy doing this, and I'm 31 at this point, and what a fuss I'm making. That's where the idea for BizKids came from. I decided then, wouldn't it be great to be able to find a way to work with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, who I was working with on the Notting Hill Shopping Bag, and to bring children from the Notting Hill schools, the state schools, of which there's many, into Portobello to learn these vital life skills. And in my head, I used to call it something like the Portobello Road Market Scheme, or some sort of very uninspiring name.
Sounds like a scheme.
And I always had in my head that this was vital. What Chase was able to do at 12 was so much more impressive than what I was able to do, that I felt that I wished I'd learned that, and how much easier it would have been for me to launch this business if I had these skills. So that's where the idea of BizKids came from, which was 2009. And I didn't really do anything about it. Life carries on. I'm running my business. The Notting Hill Shopping Bag has become a successful business in its own right. But I always had in my mind that I felt there were lots of things that I wish I'd learned at school that I hadn't learned. Now, as time went on, with the rise of AI, I mean, that's more recently, but all the kind of, the rise of the smartphone, I more and more started thinking about the gap between what we learn in school and the fact that if we have information at our fingertips and that's not correlated anymore, the schooling system is wrong. And where it really shifted for me was in COVID, where we had to teach the national curriculum. And, I looked at it and I just thought, like everyone, my business was decimated in COVID. I had staff on the job retention scheme. It was awful, as it was for all business owners. And I was like, I can't teach the national curriculum at the same time. Like, what on earth? So I thought, I'll do half an hour and I'll teach that stuff that I saw that Chase knew. I'll teach entrepreneurship. I'll teach financial literacy for half an hour a day. And that's it. And that's where BizKids started. I originally ran it in lockdown with my 2 children, my nephew, and my best friend's daughter. Within a few weeks, the word had spread, and I had around 300 children doing lessons every day for lockdown, which was I remember we did 38 lessons. So it must be 38 days during the week. And then during that period, I think I started it and called it Tash's Business School or something ridiculous, and then called it BizKids. And we got on quite lots of lockdown projects. We got on television, we got on BBC News. And that's really where it started in terms of formalizing the sentiment I had into education. Since then, I put it into an online platform and left it because COVID ended, the day job starts again, but parents still found it and signed their children up to watch the replay. So I could still get, occasionally I get the notifications, somebody's joined BizKids. It was like free forever.
Yeah.
And, I don't know what would have happened with it, apart from the fact that the schools started going on strike again last year. And that really just, again, and AI had launched. Now, as soon as ChatGPT came out and all the AI tools that launched seemingly immediately afterwards, I again thought, my goodness, this now really changes things, like in terms of what my own children are learning at school. What's the point? Everything has changed with AI.
I think you've just really hit the nail on the head in terms of, I think for certain subject areas, so if it's medical, engineering, technical, then you need to, go to the right institutions, et cetera, and learn all of that. But we have so many people in the world globally who are not all going to become doctors, engineers, scientists, etc. What are the other skills that everybody else can learn? And financial literacy. I mean, I remember the first time someone was talking to me about interest rates and I was 19. I was like, what is that? Why do I have to build my credit? Why is that important when you want to buy a house down the line? And you sort of think also about investments. And when you do start a business, how do you build wealth? And all these things are so important. And the fact that you hit the nail on the head to actually say, do you know what? I actually want to teach the skills that will help them in the next few years is formidable. Interestingly enough, China, who actually have Douyin, which is we know as TikTok, their algorithms are much, they put a lot in
Education based.
education based. It's really geared towards how much time do the children spend on the platform. Obviously, businesses are using it to promote products, etc. And then here, the algorithm is geared towards TikTok dances and trends and viral things. But also for businesses, we've heard the stories of someone saying, I launched my product on TikTok and now my business has grown 10x and that's how I launched my business. It's brilliant. It's amazing.
Been my experience on TikTok.
Yeah.
When I relaunched BizKids this year, there were two sort of primary reasons. I think one is that I'd always felt, well, there was probably loads, I definitely had always felt like, oh, I did amazing work in lockdown and what a shame that it's just been parked, right? So
Yeah.
but it wasn't like, I wasn't distressed. Like, when you've done something good, right? And you're like, that was good. I was doing something good there. And then, the rise of TikTok was another factor. So, we met through the D2C Live community, and my role was really to spearhead, innovation and next channel for the brands, 4,500 brands that are members of that community or within that community. And I was really alarmed about TikTok and the impact it would have on e-commerce. Now, it was quite early, and, I think a lot more and more brands are coming around to this now, but it was quite early in that time. And I thought, well, I can't just go on about what to do on TikTok if I don't know. I've always been quite a literal person. Like, if I'm going to bang on about something, it would be helpful if I knew it. Yeah. So I thought I'll get on TikTok with BizKids because it's good. And with my Notting Hill shopping bags as well, I'll get on there. And then I will be able to at least be talking from a place of experience. At least I'm on the platform, I'm using it, and I'll learn it from the inside out. I'll get myself the front line and I'll learn it from the inside out.
But to your point is with any new social media platform, which has been the case in even businesses where I've worked before, I've just immersed myself and gone on the platform as well. So I started on Instagram with my fitness page because I wanted to learn about Instagram and the algorithms and how it works and the reels, because there's no educational place you can go to learn about it when you're working in a brand. And similar with podcasting, I think brands that are investing in building their community and brand, etc. I started the podcast to learn about podcasting and how it can be used as a social media channel as well for a brand and not just a business. So to your point, that's already a nugget we're sharing out there. Any new platform, whether it's internet in the heyday, Instagram, TikTok, immerse yourself in it.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to not just talk in theory, particularly with these platforms. And everyone's experience on the platform then is different. So my experience with BizKids is quite different to the experience that some of the brands that I do consultancy for have. But there's still learnings, and you still understand that someone has demonstrated, success on a platform, and those learnings can be applied.
Yeah. So you talked about the reason why you started the platform was to increase entrepreneurial and business financial literacy and learn about the things that you wish you would have known, because obviously you started businesses, exited businesses. What are some of the challenges that you faced, if you want to name one or two, that you have learned from now that you wish in hindsight you could have had that nugget or treasure of information to support you?
Challenges in business, Natalia.
Yeah.
I mean, the good thing is I have quite a short memory, as in like I tend to only think about, what's happening in the last few weeks, but I mean, God, I have had, I mean, I haven't had any like disastrous moments in business, but I've certainly had all the moments of imposter syndrome, fear that the business is about to not work for one reason or another, ranging from God knows what to something massive in the economy, like anything. I've obviously had all the expected challenges with people and managing a company and managing a growing team, and disappointments, things that don't happen that you think are going to happen or that you really want to happen, or people letting you down, people, saying one thing and meaning another. I mean, everything. And this is all normal and, as I understand it, pretty standard stuff. I'm going to list them all off. I've had, legal challenges, for instance. When you're running a business that's selling stories, you have to be really careful around that media, like just getting all of that right. So I suppose overall, it's just that these things it's a cliche, but the things you worry about are not normally the things that then end up happening.
Yeah.
So I always try and remember that. And normally these things feel worse than they actually are. So for instance, I remember when my very first team member left me and talked to the press. So she left after about 2 years. And I was devastated. I literally was nearly in tears.
You may leave me.
And I couldn't believe it. It's about 17 years ago now, but I literally was in tears. And then, you always have people who you think are great, and then, people don't stay in companies forever and they leave. And I have learned that normally that's okay. Like, actually it opens space for something new or something different.
Yeah.
So I don't look back, over the years I've employed, 100, 150 people. I don't look back now and with any of them and think, like, I think that was good and they did a great job. You only get that experience in time.
Yeah. I think there's a maturity that comes with embracing every chapter of whether it's your career or your entrepreneurial journey.
Or your personal life. I mean, or chapters in all life. And it's incredibly hard to do that. It really is incredibly hard to do that, I think. And I think to think that you can do it when you're younger, I mean, I certainly couldn't and didn't. I used to get myself so stressed about certain things that, really weren't worth getting stressed at all.
Exactly. And you find that you're just over time more chilled. I look back as well, and I remember I was at a store opening. This was years ago for a business I was working for. And I was just so stressed for the wrong reasons. I think in hindsight, and now I am happy that we have a generation that cares about their work-life balance and will say, actually, no, why? Questioning the status quo. Whereas before we were like, oh my God, if we say something, we might lose our jobs.
I mean, at the Mail, I thought nothing of getting up at 5 a.m. to write a story for that next day's paper, or doing 2 stories in a day, even if it put me under inordinate pressure. But I don't think that's how people operate now in their 20s. They're not prepared to do that. And that's, much as we might think, well, that's not what we did, I think they've got a better balance.
Exactly. Yeah, they're fighting for the things that mattered to them. I think it's finding that balance, isn't it?
Yeah,
Between
absolutely.
what's an actual deadline and really can't it wait until tomorrow type thing. Yeah. Now you have built businesses, exited businesses. I want to talk about funding because we have entrepreneurs who are listening and are at that stage where I think there are 2 questions. They ask themselves, do they actually need funding? And 2, if they do, how is the experience of securing funding? Or actually, should they just continue and be bootstrapped? How have your experiences been for the different businesses? Have you been lucky that they've been self-funded? Or has it been, I'm actually taking investment?
A great question. And what timing, Natalia? So all of my businesses have been bootstrapped, but I am now raising investment for BizKids. And that, despite being 47, me being 47 and have had all these businesses, is a function of the opportunity of BizKids, the responsibility of BizKids, and the potential impact it can have. So I have always bootstrapped businesses. I suppose in the beginning, I didn't know about funding, being straight. I just didn't know about it. I hadn't come across it. I just presumed you sort of earn as much money as you could and paid yourself whatever you could live on and then reinvested the rest. A pretty straightforward, common sense approach. And I did that and I would always also try and spend company profits beyond what I'd taken myself on creating something new. So Talk to the Press as a business paid for the development of the Notting Hill shopping bag from its profit. So I took my salary and then, because I was always thinking, well, what are the options with these profits? Pay corporation tax or take them out and pay income tax or put them in a pension. I'm not doing that. It's boring. This is in my 20s and early 30s.
Reinvest.
Or create something new. So I always had this concept of using my profits to create something new. And I've done that in all the businesses. So I was always able to create a business out of the business, create something new out of the profits. And actually, D2C Live created BizKids out of its profits. So that exact same process went on. I am now fundraising for Biz. And then, sorry, before I go into that, in D2C Live and in the world of e-commerce, now we're in a different world where nearly everybody is funded, and all the tech businesses that we were working with as partners are certainly funded. So in that process, and we had a whole section of D2C Live in that community, which was about pitching and fundraising, raising investment, exits and M&A. And that's because both myself and my business partner in digital had sold businesses. So it became something we were known for. So that was a huge learning curve in terms of seeing businesses that were making losses, but, you know, carrying value and then able to get through to value in the end. Being part of the journey of driving huge value into a number of brands through the work we did, and then realizing that their investment in things like an agency partner had really paid off. You know, it really opened my mind, and I also learned so much more about it. I met so many more funded entrepreneurs and a huge number of VC funds and investors. So with BizKids, I am now raising investment for the very first time.
It's amazing.
I know, and it's because, you know, BizKids is scalable. It can have global impact. It's also there's a huge number of children across the UK watching BizKids. It's a very hard to reach audience. So in this instance, for me, it feels like the right thing to do to raise funds because of the impact BizKids is having, how to accelerate that impact and how to grow it globally. But that said, BizKids is at a very early stage. You know, we have this huge social audience we've built and this huge measurable impact of all these children, but we are really, I would say, in the very early stages of revenue generation and commercialization. So it's great. I mean, there's a lot of people interested in investing in BizKids because a lot of people feel extremely passionately about the education system.
Yeah. And I love how you summarized it. It's really good just to reiterate that message for entrepreneurs that actually your first goal is to generate revenue and be profitable. And if you can do that, don't let anyone convince you that you need further investment and give away a percentage of your business. If you are revenue generating and profitable, and you're able to, as you've done before, taking your profits and saying, these are the three things I could do. I either will reinvest and grow the business or reinvest and build new businesses. I think that there is a danger of watching social media about, oh, this business now is 10x investment and et cetera, unicorns.
Yeah, I mean, that type of narrative is very of the moment, you know, and I just think because I've been in this for so long and normally in quite public facing roles with quite a lot of a personal brand presence across whatever business I've done. I do think this whole narrative now of you know, everything's, and it was like this in D2C Live, you know, everyone was trying to build a brand that was worth 100 million. That was like almost like the default position, as though having a brand that's doing 10 million in revenue isn't a huge success. You know, I do think it's gone quite extreme, and the way I reconcile that in my mind is just think, well, let everyone get on with what they want to do in their very different ways. Like, who am I to judge, right? That's kind of what I thought. They can get on with that, and I'll get on with this. But I don't like it when people feel that they're not successful because their business is, say, turning over, you know, £800,000 and doing 150 grand in profit or whatever. I mean, that is a success, right?
Exactly.
It's in anyone's book.
Yeah, you're doing 6 figures, you know.
And actually, to give you a context, you know, when Talk to the Press, which I sold, and Talk to the Press was able to create from its profits the Notting Hill shopping bag, it gave me, you know, very big media platform. We never did more than £500,000 in revenue, and I thought I was incredibly successful. So, you know, and I was able to exit it.
Yeah.
And it's carried on as its own entity for 10 years since. You know, these are successes.
That's true. And I think that's it. I have the conversations even with my kids about what successful businesses look like within our little village, I'll say, do you know that business over there? That's worth this much. They're, they're an entrepreneur. They're able to go on holiday. They have their homes and they're profitable. So it's just putting context, isn't it, as to what success looks like. Yeah.
No, I think one of the reasons, and this will be more the case for women, but success is not always, a purely financial thing. I wanted to have a career, and the reason I wanted to, I could see I couldn't have kids and be in a corporate environment like the Daily Mail. It was just too non-conducive to flexibility. And so for me, it was about, okay, I want to work and have a great business that earns me, gives me professional pride. But I don't want to ever be more than a mile away. I used to have this thing, an obsession about staying within a mile radius of my house and the nursery, because that was my way of coping with the juggle. And I thought, at least if I'm near, I'll never have, you get those god awful calls from the nursery.
You can sprint to the nursery.
Yeah, and you get them all the time, and they make your blood run cold.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, at least if I never leave this mile run radius, I will always be able to get there really fast. Imagine having to commute across London. I couldn't have done it. It would have stressed me out too much. So that was a measure of success for me as well, was I can be flexible and always be near my children, even if I am working, I'm physically there.
That was your why, isn't it? Your why and your so what for being maybe ambitious in that area as well?
Yes, it was my compromise. It's like, I am ambitious, sorry guys, but at least I'm only a mile down the road.
Do you know what comes through all of this is you've got an entrepreneurial spirit, you're very positive, you've got a great character, and I think that's helped with you building businesses and your network, because we all talk about, from a business perspective, building brand and community, but also building your personal brand and your community within a network to grow. Talk to me about how you've built connections and your networking strategy. Like, what's your strategy, Tash?
I think it's a bit advanced to think I have a strategy. I mean, to zoom out, I have always, so when I built Talk to the Press, okay, which was an online business, I used to think, okay, I always had it in my head that people in America knew what they were doing more than people in the UK. So I used to follow various American digital marketing people. This was back in 2007. I used to go on and take a plane every now and again to go to a conference. These were the likes of people like Derek Halpin, early digital marketing gurus who were always talking about personal branding. Because I had a profile, because I'd been a national newspaper journalist and I'd done some TV, I thought, well, I should definitely build my personal brand. Now, I've had huge amount of times when I've done a lot of personal branding work and other times when it's fallen by the radar. But the power of personal, I've written a book in 2016. I wrote my second book called Stand Out Online, which is about personal branding. So I'm a massive advocate of the power of a personal brand, which I think actually, there's all sorts of benefits to it, but it also helps networking, because sometimes it's not possible to be in touch with everybody all the time. Think about the number of people who would be in the D2C Live community. There'd be no way I'd be physically capable of handling that many relationships were it not for having an aspect of me that was delivered via a personal brand, i.e. content, videos, standing on stage at D2C Live. So the one thing I think I have been quite strategic about, albeit with varying degrees of success, is personal branding. And I've consistently done that since 2007. In Talk to the Press, the very early digital marketing techniques that I used to build that business were the SEO, the book about Google, pay-per-click Google advertising, lead generation, email marketing, and personal branding. Most journalists were hiding behind a kind of, people don't like journalists, okay, especially tabloid newspaper journalists. They just don't like them. And I knew that. You go to an event, you say, hi, I'm from the Daily Mail. People be like, oh, God, get away from me.
No way.
So I knew people, and I thought, well, but I also knew that I was a nice person. So I thought, all I need to do is do a video. It was again considered quite a forward think. I had a video made, put myself on it. Say, when you contact Talk to the Press, this organisation is led by. Oh, sorry, my phone's just ringing. Yeah, this.
No worries.
When you contact Talk to the Press, this organisation is led by Tash. I am the trusted face and I will look after you. And that really helped. And then I had to trust myself that I would look after families, because I always had looked after families. And I carried that through, always putting myself on things in one way or another, even though I do think some people must think, bloody hell, what's she up to now? Because sometimes it's like oscillates around a bit.
It's a lot about putting yourself out there, isn't it?
sometimes I really don't feel like it. Sometimes like everybody else, I'll be thinking things aren't going right. I'm not pretty enough. Like, all those thoughts. Like, my clothes aren't right. Who am I to think that I should have an opinion? Every single thought that hopefully it's not just me who has these thoughts. Everyone else does too. But all of these thoughts I have then and I would have now. Do try and just get my content out anyway as much as I can and hope for the best.
It's like, right, it's out now. What's
I
the
never
worst that can
watch it.
happen?
I never look back at it because I always think how embarrassing. Although when I look back, what I found, this might be interesting for people. If I put content out and look at it on the day, I'll think, my God, you look awful. Yeah, what do you want about it? When I look at it a month later, I'll be like, that was a great piece of content. You really shared some great advice there. So there's something about.
I'm the same, Tash. So I built my website, my personal brand website, because my friend said if you want to establish yourself as a speaker, consultant, etc., you need something that people can type in your name and they can find a platform. Now it's work in progress. I'm open to your critique, Tash, afterwards in person. But the most exciting part I liked about it was uploading interviews I'd done before. And you're right, the ones I did years ago where I was like, oh my God, I was actually pretty good at this. So I did a good job. Do you know?
What is it then that immediately you would have a negative view? Because this is definitely me. And me, it's like my immediate negative view is like, oh no, terrible. And then time goes by, you're like, oh, that was really good. Like, what is it about our brains that would allow that to happen? And is that something we can stop? And I do not have the answers because I still, if I look at something on the day, like when you look at a photo of yourself right after someone's taken it, I'm always like, oh, that's not a very good photo.
Exactly.
Look at it a year later, you're like, that was a great photo.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to be said about you have to put yourself out there to build your personal brand, but also personal brand. I heard this on the Diary of a CEO podcast, is the personal brand is what are people saying about you when you're not in the room? The whispers, you know.
I know.
And
I don't know what people say about me.
Over time.
Yeah, I don't know.
But those are the whispers. That's what gets the recommendations or people coming back for more. And people say, actually, D2C Live is really great. Or actually, let's get on Tash Talks. I think that's where over time it comes across. And just advocating even for women, which we're going to talk about now, women empowerment and leadership. You are a strong advocate for women's entrepreneurs. And how do you see your role, through the initiatives like Tash Talks and Meta, She Means Business? Talk to me about that and how that's helped you in moving the needle, paying it forward.
Yeah, I mean, my first real experience of working with women at scale and seeing the kind of challenges that women might face in entrepreneurship was via Meta's She Means Business program. And after I'd sold Talk to the Press, I'd sold an online business and I'd written a book called The $1 Million Blog, which was a bestseller. It was, I don't know, 2016 or 2015. Sheryl Sandberg had launched this She Means Business initiative, which they wanted to roll out in the UK, and they were looking for founding ambassadors for it. And I got asked to be one of those founding ambassadors. I didn't know that much I knew a bit about Facebook at the time, but I was much more steeped in Google, SEO and email marketing, the techniques that Talk to the Press. And obviously, it was a huge honor to be asked to be on that program. And between the trainers, we started off with about 8 trainers and ended up with about 25. We trained over 100,000 women across the UK in how to use Facebook and Instagram to grow their business. And that was where I started to realize that what I had thought was just, I don't know what I thought it was, the things I was doing that made Talk to the Press rank top of Google, the going to America to learn all this, what the futuristic digital marketing stuff, personal branding. That's when I learned that there was a vocabulary around the skills I had that that people really needed, because we were going around the UK meeting all these women. And I could really see they didn't have digital marketing skills. They weren't using platforms in the way I was. They didn't have, by that point, I think I'd already been, deep in platforms for 8 or 9 years. It's a long time to be running websites and digital businesses and lead. And I thought everybody knew this stuff. And then I realized they didn't. I think when you start helping people in that way, you only have to do something really small to and someone else is like, wow, that's really going to change things. And you think, oh my God, that's amazing. So that's where it all started. I mean, Tash Talk, I think, so Tash Talks is my show on Sky 186. And
I know, it's on Sky, guys. Check it out.
In fact, the third series has just been commissioned. My sponsors Recharge, the subscription app, have sponsoring that. And that's really about hearing from successful women. I do think sometimes the narrative is, well, on my LinkedIn echo chamber, it can be quite like, oh, women find it really hard to raise. It can get quite like, oh my God, what are we all going to do? This is really hard for women. And, I find that when I read LinkedIn. And what I try and do with Tash Talks is just tell the different stories of women and where they've got to. And they're all pretty successful. We've had the founders of brands like Elemis on there, and that's great. And I just more want to not dwell too much on the challenges. That's not to say the challenges aren't real. I think they are real. And, I used to never think of myself by gender. I do think there's reason to consider your gender, in life, because I think it does have an impact.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where, so I'm the oldest of, and I'm the firstborn, and he always said, so he said, you have to fight twice as hard because you're Black and because you're a woman. But that does not mean you don't belong in the circles, in the rooms that you want to get into. And as long as you have that front of mind, you can do anything. That's the mindset you should have. Take every challenge as an opportunity. If a door closes, bulldozer through others. And it's what your podcast and your talks are doing. And what we're trying to do here is to say, of course, there will be challenges. That is life, no matter what you look like, gender. Obviously, some people have, I think if you've got generational wealth and someone there are a few stepping stones that give you a head start. It's just a fact. However, you can do anything. And I'm a firm believer, your phone, there are people who are starting businesses by going on social media, highlighting. The more we highlight and amplify great things that are happening to women in business across multiple categories, then we're showing the different faces of what good looks like. I think it's great.
It's really, and that's exactly what I tried to do on Tash Talks. And, I suppose I've always, it was when I was at the Mail and in mainstream news, there was a real rhetoric around women and this concept of having it all, which was more about the practical reality of juggling, household responsibilities with ambition, with children, with aging parents, and that being a feminine role. That rhetoric has moved on now, because now it's more about, no one really questions whether a woman can juggle that. It's just thought, well, they can, right? They can manage that juggle somehow. Obviously, a lot of us will be at times, desperately clinging on by our fingernails.
Yeah.
But now it's more about opportunity for women in terms of, okay, we have this huge cohort of professional women who are able to juggle, and now they're not able to fundraise. They're not able to fundraise as easily. They're not able to get certain opportunities. They're underrepresented on board. So the story's moved on to some degree, but the fact that women face challenges is an ongoing situation.
Yeah. Now I'm going to use the dirty word, work-life balance.
Yeah, I mean, this was the whole story of my life at the Daily Mail. We used to talk about it all the time.
But for me, I'm just curious to understand, you've worn so many hats: entrepreneur, investor, speaker, author, mother, friend, confidant, the list goes on. How do you find time for you, and what do you do for yourself to unwind and just take care of Tash?
I don't think I do. I think I'm hopeless at it. To be honest. I'll go through phases and where I'll do more exercise or less. And I've always been quite work obsessed. And then it's, then obviously I'm juggling the kids. I think I'm really bad at even knowing what I'd want to do left to my own devices. I think that's an area that's got to be improved. It's actually, on my mind daily that this is all fine, but I have to get a better balance. And also, I think the other thing that's interesting is sometimes you ask yourself, like, what's the motivation? I feel that I'm someone who's, and you're probably the same from having spent time with you, has drive at my core. And it doesn't even matter where I get to in life. I still have this drive. And I think sometimes you have to, and this is way easier said than done, you do have to say to yourself, like, that's all very well, but like, why? Where is this coming from? Where's it originating from? Because I could easily lead a much, much more relaxed life than I do, really, and I'm sure loads of people could. And then I have to remind myself that if I'm choosing not to, then I need to accept my personality as it is. For a long time, I really wrestled with being driven. I used to say to people, I believed I was cursed by drive because I was so unable to relax that I used to say, I've got, there's something in me and it's not a blessing, right? This is a curse. If I look at people who might lead different lifestyles or more chilled lives. So I have no answer to that, I'm afraid, Tola, other than
It's
I
an
don't
ongoing work
think
in progress.
it's an ongoing work in progress. Yeah. And I haven't got it. I don't think I've got it right. Although I do think it varies over time. And it's really important to not be like, oh, I've worked too hard this year and act like that's what you've always done, because, there's other times when things are different.
Yeah. But also a lot of it is you're doing things that are passionate. I think especially with BizKids, this is like a passion you're giving back. And maybe that doesn't feel like work in a way. Of course, now you're raising investments and so on, but maybe that doesn't feel like work to you. But you asked a very interesting question, because I always think about it for myself is, where does my drive come from? And I know where it's rooted, what the foundation is. It's different things we went through as a family. And I said, I never, ever want to be in that position again. And I'm the oldest. I have to lead by example. So there are lots of underlying things that are sort of like the catalyst. But is there anything in your childhood where you thought there's something that sparked that?
I mean, for sure. Look, I grew up in very unusual circumstances. My parents, we lived in an enormous house and my parents ran a business, but the house was the business. And, our grand hall was the reception. There were desks and phones everywhere. So we lived in a tiny portion of this enormous house. And everyone would have thought, my God, she lives in a frightfully large house. I used to think, my God, we live in this tiny, little thing over here. Yeah, we live in the cupboard. And everything else was opposite. So I grew up inside a business. My parents ran this business. It was a consulting and training business, the Ministry of Defence. Every morning we had cars would arrive and the car park would fill up. So I think that was a very unusual childhood to be growing up inside a business. My domestic setting was a business.
Yeah.
Secondly, my father died when I was 15. And I think I've since done a lot of work with the Child Bereavement UK, helping children who've lost a parent. And at that time in 1992, nobody, obviously how people are affected emotionally is much more known about now than it was then. Through the work I've done with children who've lost a parent and the training I've had to go through in order to do that work, I now know that the fear that happens to a child when they lose a parent, which is what happened to me. And, my dad was the leader of that business. He was, definitely seen as the main provider. It was absolutely terrifying, to be honest, in all sorts of ways. But there's no doubt that losing my father at that age has defined everything, much as though I didn't want it to. And I always thought, I knew when I lost my father, I thought, oh God, this is not great, right? I'm only 15 and my dad died. Like, this cannot be good. And I thought, but I won't let it define me. I won't carry this for my life. In actual fact, to some extent, it has defined, I think, me, and I have carried that for my life. And I'm sure it plays into why I would feel so motivated, because a bit like you, where you're saying these things will not happen to me, whatever you'd experience, it's like, it was such a fright. It was, as well as incredibly upsetting and all those other things, but the fear was immense. The fear I felt.
It defines the direction you take in your life. So my brief story is, my dad was very successful from an entrepreneur perspective, and then we just hit really hard times. And I remember saying to myself, I never ever want to be an entrepreneur. I want to work for someone where I have a steady paycheck, etc., etc. But now the more entrepreneurs I meet, now even advising entrepreneurs, advising businesses how to expand into new markets, I've just realized I am my father's child. I am the entrepreneur that I was always in the end. And I always wanted to, I'm sure, and he listens to the podcast, I always wanted to make sure that his sacrifices and everything he went through was not in vain. That's my drive, basically. Yeah.
I think these things, some of my friends, families that were similar, like successful business people, they lost money. They have been greatly affected by that. If that happens in your childhood or teenage years, or even in your early 20s, these things Their significance shouldn't be underestimated, I don't think.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Tash, for being vulnerable and sharing. That's what makes us human, isn't it? I think sharing those experiences about
Yeah, and
us.
it took me about 30 years to even be able to talk about the fact my father
Yeah,
died.
I can imagine.
For a long time, I used to pretend he was still alive. People would say, "Where do your parents live?" And I'd be like, "My parents are out there," because you don't want to put a dampener on the conversation saying, "Oh,
Exactly.
my dad's
You
dead."
don't just like having that conversation as
You
well.
don't want to
Yeah.
have that conversation, an awkward one, and then they're sorry, and you're like, "Oh my God." And so, I mean, it took me so long to be able to talk about it. And it was really through the work I did with the younger children who'd lost their
Yeah.
parents that I learned to talk about it.
What's next for Tash? Where do you see, what are your future ambitions, visions? What's going on?
Well, I mean, I work with a number of brands and tech companies, some of which I have shareholdings in, which is fantastic. And I want to continue to deliver, great impact into those businesses. For BizKids, I want it to be a global platform teaching children these skills. I think it's going to go on quite a journey. Everything needs enhancing. It's been done on a shoestring. It's been done a couple of hours on a Monday. Everything about it needs enhancing and improvement. We've had tremendous impact. And I know there's hundreds of children across the UK who are now understanding they can take £20 and turn it into £200 through following our simple business models. And that's a real life empowering lesson for them. And I very much hope that BizKids is able to achieve that sort of potential. I'm back in the beginning of a business again. I mean, the good news is I've been here before.
Yes, exactly. Just a different chapter, isn't it? No, we'll definitely put it in the show notes so people can find BizKids and hear it. It was just really good. So, last but not least, we end the podcast where we ask our guests to leave 3 Trailblazer takeaway tips to share with the audience. What would they be?
3 Trailblazer takeaway tips. Okay, tip number 1 is definitely that the things you are worrying about are probably not going to be the things that actually happen. So it might happen in one way or another, but it's guaranteed not to happen the way the worry storyline is playing out in your head. If that does happen, and I half of these tips are for myself, because like everyone else, you go through these, if that does happen, then I think it's really important to remember that these things are passing. They're not life defining. If you are like me and you are very driven and always done well at school and, being a good girl, it can be really destabilizing to not be perfect. Okay. I come from a family where if you don't get top marks, you're basically in trouble. So I very much carry that as a burden of needing to be perfection and get everything right. That has caused me a lot of stress over my life, having that as my rhetoric and taking it on me. And I've come to realize that it really is not like that. The person I used to most worry about thinking I'd done something wrong was my mother. It transpires no matter what I do. My mother thinks I'm brilliant, so I've got no idea what I was worrying about at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's all illogical. Yeah. So my second tip is, you mustn't let small or moments or passing things define you, which is very hard to do. And my third tip is really to believe that you can do it and to not worry too much about what other people are saying. When I go around talking to people, even about BizKids, which is, having a tremendously positive impact, there'll always be someone who says, "Oh, you could do this, you could do that," or "What about this and what about that?" Always just take it as information and interest. I used to get very defensive when people used to say, "Tash, have you thought about doing this?" Or not with this will be all the businesses. I'd always be very defensive. I don't know. It's actually really interesting. It's really interesting to hear what people are saying. You don't have to listen. And I say this to my daughter. She was saying about something and this person said, and I said, you don't have to either listen or react. Just listen. Just listen and decide if it's something that might have some relevance.
I love that. Not every action deserves a reaction. Just soak it in. Yeah.
Just soak it in. And normally there's something in it. And it's more about controlling your inner state, or I find it about controlling my inner state and not getting either defensive or feeling criticized and just thinking, okay, interesting. Just say the word interesting after something, everybody, in your head.
When somebody says interesting, I see.
Yeah, interesting. And then think about it, but don't let it kind of lead to an emotional reaction.
Exactly. Tash, this has been amazing.
Thank you so much. The time's flown by.
I know. I was saying, it's just 2 girls having a chat. that everybody else is going to listen to. I'd love to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your story. You need to be proud of yourself and everything that you've achieved, and giving back, paying it forward, whether it's for women, businesses, now for kids, the next generation. It's really a testament to you as a person and your character and your personality. And I'm so glad that our paths have and we've made this happen. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, that has been the Trailblazer Experience podcast. For the audience, please tell another woman about the podcast. And remember to do the usual: follow, share, and subscribe. Until next time, bye. That was amazing.